relationship between fathers, daughters, fathers, sons, sons and fathers, daughters and fathers. And it has an eternal fascination. What Shakespeare does is he ups the ante by making it not just family, but the family is kind of a metaphor and is a microcosm of the state. So by definition, the division of the family resources is a political decision.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
So that's how I arrived there. And then the logic of it was that where does Goneril live? She obviously lives in a early 19th century house. Where does the Prime Minister live? He lives in Hatfield House, which is exquisite Tudor house. And where is the cliff? Well, it's where Shakespeare set it, in the cliff at Dover.
Thank you. I mean, I think the tower is especially resonant, and it was, of course, for Shakespeare, because the two princes are talking about where they're going to spend the night, and evil Uncle Richard says, you know, we'll put you in the tower for a night, and the whole audience is already scared about, you know. So that's a terrific. That setting works brilliantly, and I think the combination of the modernity of the, the point about the panning in along the river and the dropping down onto Tower Bridge and so on, it does bring home the degree to which London is a city of immense inequality, immense wealth, and immense poverty. And banging my Brexit drum, the fact that austerity, which perhaps we can move on to now, austerity has increased homelessness rates in London, in the capital. I won't comment on Paris, but in comparison to London, it seems that the problem there is much more intense than I've seen here in the last 3 days, but I'm ignorant because I've only been here 2 or 3 days, so I don't get involved in that. But I did want to return to a conversation you had with Ian Holm, who obviously played your Lear on stage, to take up exactly what you've just been saying. You had dinner with Ian Holm. This is 1st of October 95. We talk almost entirely of Lear, about love of family, of children, of failing to express it, of fathers and of kings, of parental tyranny, different only in scale from the political variety. We talk of old age, we talk of madness. That's the easy bit, says Ian. I'm going, if I may, to show a second extract, which is much shorter than the previous one. Do I just click and hope for... Oh, I see, it counts.
What scene are you on?
I'm going to show the jungle camp.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's...
Which I thought has a French connection.
Yeah.
Ooh. I'll go from... I'm almost there. I think I hope my time is...
And like not this unnatural dealing, they've taken from me use of mine own house, charged me on pain of perpetual displeasure, or any ways to stay. I have received a letter this night. It is dangerous to be spoken. These injuries the king now bears will be revenged, for as part of the power from France already footed. We must in time to the king. I will look for him. Go you and maintain talk with the Duke, that my charity be not a thing perceived. If you ask for me, I'm ill and go to bed. My life already, as no less is threatened me. King, my old master, must be relieved. Pray you.
Here is the place, my lord! My lord! Enter! The tyranny of the open night is too rough for nature to endure.
Let me alone.
Good my lord, enter here.
Let thee go in thyself. Seek thy no means. This tempest will not give me leave to ponder, it will hurt me more. But I'll go in my cloak first. I pray. Then I sleep.
Oh, Lord.
Poor naked wretches, wheresoever you are, bide the pelting of this pitiless storm. How should your houseless heads, your unfed sides, Your lute and window crack must defend you from seasons such as these. Oh, I have taken too little care of this. Take physic, pump! Expose thyself to feel what wretches feel.
Help me! A spirit! A spirit!
Oh, huh?
What's up now? That you scramble there? Come forth!
The father must be. Go to my bed and warn me.
Didst thou give all to thy daughters, and dost thou come to this?
He hath no daughters, sir.
Poor Tom!
Death, danger, nothing could have subdued nature to such a lowness but his unkind daughters.
Bless me, fragrance. Tom, I'm cold.
What hast thou been?
A serving man, proud in heart and mind, who curled my hair, wore gloves in my cap, served the love of my mistress's heart, and did the act of darkness in the sweet face of heaven, talking to my wife, sister.
Is man no more than this? Yes, we are sophisticated. Thou art the thing itself. Unaccommodated man is no more than such a poor, bare-forked animal as thou art. You lendings, come on but here.
Can it not go? Take it. Tis a naughty night to swim in. Look, here comes a walking fire.
How fares your grace?
What's on that eats the swimming frog?
Has your grace no better company?
The Prince of Darkness is a gentleman. Cold.
Come with me. I beg you to come seek you out and bring you where the fire and food is ready. Let me talk a word with this philosopher.
Good my lord.
What is the cause of thunder?
Good my lord. Take his offer. Go to the house.
I do beseech your grace. By your mercy, sir. Come, noble philosopher, your company.
Cold.
Enter where city wall.
No. This way, my lord.
Never will keep company with my philosopher. Come. Good opinion.
Oh, so be good, my lord. Let me take the fellow on.
I'll give you one. So good, sir. Good opinion.
This is the letter which he spoke of, which proved.
So we've moved in this film from the luxury and the beautiful architecture of central London, with its money dealers and its hedge fund managers, to sort of Calais jungle camp, and it does seem to me that this scene speaks immediately to. There was a very, as you know, a very important production called The Jungle, which started at the Young Vic and then moved into the West End, about precisely the status of the refugee and what it means to live in these abysmal camps. And it does seem to me that this is one of the scenes in which, you know, a topical, political, detailed, all of those words that we've already been using, and a sort of naturalist sense of what this play might mean in larger political terms is very, very pronounced. If you want to talk to that, Richard, I'm going to look for the next scene because I'm conscious of time, and I'll just...
Okay, well, I can just say that was arrived at logically, not by a sort of polemical intervention on my part. It wasn't a piece of conceptual thinking. It was logical. You're cast out into... We filmed that in a chalk quarry, and it's like the surface of the moon. And I thought, well, Kent says there is a hovel nearby. And I thought, well, what hovel is there going to be? Maybe there's and I started thinking there's a pigsty. And then I thought of, we have taken too little care of this, and poor houseless people. And then I started thinking, well, who are the houseless people? And who are the people who are dispossessed in a similar way to Lear, cast out of their homes? And I thought, well, it has to be migrants, people who simply have no place to put their heads. And actually, those who know the play will have been possibly exasperated by the fact it's heavily cut. I mean, my version runs at 1 hour and 56 minutes, which is, I can tell you, 25 minutes shorter than the movie A Star is Born. And I believe that our film tells the story and with incredible power, which is an interesting reflection on how you can condense Shakespeare. Anyway, I thought that the logic of it was to put it in a camp, and that Lear found himself with the dispossessed, and that's what inspires his speech and let me alone, let me pray a while, is precisely because something has taken his attention.
And I think what happens in the next scene is an intensification of that, because if Lear's sort of reflecting consciously on the poverty and the decrepitude that's sort of surrounding him, here we get a similar kind of grim setting, but he's obviously now less than sane, I think. Let's have a look.
Don't their clothes young? Look at mouse. Piece of toasted cheese, will you?
Know that voice?
Oh, well, for old bird. In the clout, sure. Shoot. Give the word.
Sweet marjoram.
Goneril with a white beard. They flattered me like a dog and told me I had the white hairs in my beard and the black ones were there to say, you know to everything I say. You know to there's no good divinity.
That voice I do well remember. It's not the king.
Aye, Ranger King. When I just stare, see how the subject quakes. I pardon my man's life. What was thy cause? Adultery? I shall not die. Die for adultery? No. Let copulation thrive. Gloucester's bastard son was kinder to his father than my daughters got between the lawful sheets. To it luxury pell-mell, for I lack soldiers. Down from the waist there centaurs, the women all about, but to the girdles of the gods inherit beneath is all the fiends. There's hell, there's darkness, there's the sulphurous pit, burning, scalding stench, consumption, pie. Give me an ounce of civet, good apothecary, to sweeten my imagination. There's money for thee.
Let me kiss that hand.
Now let me wipe it first. It smells of mortality.
Dost thou know it?
I remember thine eyes well enough. Read thou this challenge. Mark but the pen of it.
For all thy letters, sons, I could not see.
Read.
What? With the case of eyes?
Oh, are you there with me? No eyes in your head, nor no money in your purse. Your eyes are in a heavy case. That you may see how this world goes.
See it feelingly.
What? I'm mad. A man may see how this world goes with no eyes. Now get thee glass eyes, and like a scurvy politician, seem to see the things thou dost not. No. If thou wilt weep my cause, take my eyes. I know thee well enough. Thy name is Gloucester. Thou must be patient. We came crying hither. Thou knowest the first time that we smell the air, we wail and cry. I will preach to thee, Mark. When we are born, we cry that we are come to this great stage of fools. Hey, this is a good block. Oi. Yeah. For a delicate stratagem, just shoe a tube of horse with felt. Shh. I put it in proof, and when I have stolen upon these son-in-laws, then tell.
masters not do that?
You are the royal one and we obey you.
There is life in it. Come and you get it, you shall get it by running.
Where's your...
Again, do you want to just comment on how that scene came about, Richard? I don't think the people of Stevenage would be very fond of it.
No, this is a shopping mall. It's part of the urban blight of Britain. It built in optimistic days of the 1960s. It's a heart-sinkingly depressing place. I was just, again, trying to think logically, what happens is we know that he's taken off with the fool. In my version, you see the fool dying. And then he reappears when in the play with when Gloucester and Edgar see him, and it's on the heath, and he's mad and he's got flowers in his hair. We hear a description. Cordelia is told, and she sends off soldiers to the French army to look for him. Incidentally, a French actor there playing the French officer. And I thought, well, what has happened to him? He's getting food somewhere, so he's become like what we call a bag person. I don't know what you call him. What do you call him in French? Yeah, pas exactement clochard, but anyway. So that's okay. And that's what he's become, and he's wearing the fool's hat, and he's got flowers around that, and he's just collecting things. Now, the scene, that's a very, very long scene in the theatre, the mad scene. And it's a scene that everybody plays, and everybody says, oh, that scene goes on a long time. And that it does in the theatre. And you have to be brutal, I think, about cutting it. And so my version, if you know it very well, that is, I mean, there are 2 or 3 lines that I wish I'd kept in, but it's extremely compressed. But the logic of it was simply, where is he? He's just picking up food, and he's going around like those dispossessed people do, and they steal those chariots, the shopping trolleys, and they fill it with rubbish. And he had a little dog in the front of that shopping trolley, and there was a bit where he talked to his little, it was just a toy dog, but I had to cut that for reasons of time. But again, it was just simply logical. Where does he end up? How does he get there?
Right.
A sort of, and where are Gloucester and Edgar? Well, they're sitting around equally dispossessed.
Thank you. I hope we've given you a flavour of the film. We've got another 13 minutes, actually, and I know that we're anxious to hear from the floor, so I won't say anything else really, perhaps a few closing remarks, but between now and then, I'll hand back to Florence to take questions from the floor.
You're not going to show my favourite scene.
Oh.
Well, it's my favourite, I said before, is the scene with Lear and Cordelia when they're being marched off to prison. So maybe it's quite
near the end.
Short. It is very near the end.
It's before the fight, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's before the fight.
Is the film
There we are.
No, the film, I should say, was made by.
No, sorry, is it going to be shown?
No, I'm just going to tell you. It was made by Amazon and the BBC. For reasons I don't understand, at the moment, it's only available in the US on Amazon, but it will become available in the whole of Europe on Amazon. You'll be able to stream it on Amazon. But I'm afraid I don't know when it's going to come. But it definitely will be shown. Yeah.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. I suppose you ought to be allowed to choose this.
Yeah.
Is that in the right place?
So just before that.
Just before that.
When she shuts.
Let's go back.
Just yeah, the beginning of there. Yeah, fine.
Got it.
We are nobles who with best meaning having got the worst. So we don't see these daughters and these sisters.
Come, let's await it this way. We two alone will sing like birds in the cage. When thou dost ask me blessing, I'll kneel down and ask of thee forgiveness. And so we will live and pray and sing and tell old tales and laugh at gilded butterflies. And hear poor rogues talk of court news, and we'll talk of them too. Who loses and wins, who's in who's out. Take upon us the mystery of things, as if we were God's spies. And we'll wear out in the walled prison packs and sects of great ones that ebb and flow by the moon. Upon such sacrifices, my Cordelia, the gods themselves throw incense. Have I caught thee?
He that parts us shall bring a brand from heaven and fire us hence like foxes.
Wet thine eyes. Good years shall devour them, flesh and fell. They shall make us weep. We'll see him starved first.
I think it is worth commenting on Henry IV, Hollow Crown, the battle scene at the end of that, which is in a snowy field, which is very metallic and white and contrasts very much with the kind of glowing fires of the East Cheap scenes. I think it's a beautiful effect, the way that happens towards the end of this film, but I mustn't say any more because we've got... Sorry.
Anyway, I don't think I need to apologise for insisting on showing that.
Over to you.
We'll open the floor. Any questions? Sarah.
The gesture. The gesture of Anthony Hopkins taking his daughter by the neck that we see at the beginning, actually. Is it something that you asked him to do or that he chose to do? And it reminded me a lot of his role as Titus when he's about to kill Lavinia. So it's in a way a very loving gesture, but also a very aggressive one. So I was wondering what you thought of that.
Well, you know, I think it would be Tony, because I don't. Sometimes with him, I'm very, very specific about, you know, can you do that there? But what I tend to do, and I tend to do it more and more with actors, and it's to do with confidence, my confidence, and to do with age. That the more experienced I am, the more I feel I like to let actors do their thing and see what they do, and then edit what they do. I mean, on the spot. I don't mean edit in the you know, montage sense, and say so. I encourage them if they do something in rehearsal. Say that's, you know, do that. I tend not to say that's wonderful. Do it because it's wonderful. Just say do it. Or you know, it's better if you don't do that. And I find that's much more productive than saying to an actor, do this, do that, do that. And, you know, I mean, I've known Tony Hopkins for ages, for, you know, maybe 40 years. And he's just a great, great actor. And you don't program a great actor. You're lucky to be there in the present. And what you do is mold what they're doing and just, you know, put them together. And he adored Florence, who is that young, the Cordelia. And really, I just set that scene up, and I found it a hard scene to direct, because when I watch it still, it moves me to tears. And that's a very, very bad thing for a director. It's like, you know, a surgeon does not want to be, you don't want your surgeon crying while the surgeon is operating. So.
Thank you very much for this answer, because in a way you're paving the way for our next conference here, the Société Française Shakespeare, because in January 2020, the topic we chose this morning will be Shakespeare and actors. So you're paving the way for it. Thank you. And then I had another question about the Fool, because you mentioned the fact that in your version of King Lear, the Fool dies. And there's, in Shakespeare's play, there's a close connection between the Fool and Cordelia, because the Fool disappears at one point, and then Cordelia comes back, and perhaps can be explained by practical reasons. Perhaps it was the same actor playing the Fool and Cordelia. But these two characters are very close to Lear. And what about your vision of the Fool? What about the specific connection between Cordelia and the Fool?
Well, it's based, that proposition, that hypothesis, is based on the fact that he says, my poor fool is dead, when he has the body of Cordelia in his arms. It's possible that was the double, but for an audience in the theatre or in the film, it's really, you have to make a choice. And first of all, that terrible speech, Merlin speech, is it Merlin? Merlin. It's just, I mean, so obviously just not to do with the play, but you have to make a choice. And so both in the theatre and in the film, I say, I want to answer the question, what happens to the Fool? And the Fool you see in the storm, he gets increasingly exhausted. And in the scene, which I love the scene of the mock trial, where Lear is completely mad. And in my version, it's set inside a container, you know, the kind of that loaded onto ships. It's just like on a building site. And the Fool is just exhausted, and he keeps trying to keep going and keeps trying to make jokes to keep up Lear's spirits. And then Gloucester arrives and says, quick, you know, I've got a litter outside, and hurry, get away from here. And you see Lear loaded into an ambulance with the Fool, and you just see the Fool. You see the death rattle, you see and hear the death rattle of the Fool. So the Fool, you know, is now out of the story. It's an interesting speculation. And I still have kept in his reference to, and my poor Fool is dead, because I think he does see the people he's felt closest to. You know, there is Cordelia's, the corpse, and you see in the film, her dead face, and it's very, very, very powerful. It's something, of course, you can't do in the theatre, really. So for me, it's that works, and I couldn't. It's a fascinating footnote, but I'm absolutely not anti academics at all. I mean, I'm fascinated by whenever somebody, and I read quite a lot of academic writing about Shakespeare, and I'm grateful for any ideas from anywhere, and I'll just steal them and claim them as my own. It's just that you've got to think as a director, how is the audience responding in the present tense? And you have no opportunity of footnotes or, you know, of any sort of contextualizing. It's got to be there. And a film even more than theatre, because in the theatre you can kind of read a program or you can contextualize. In a film, you've been educated by watching movies since a child to get, you know, it's got to be there in the moment.
Richard, can I borrow you? Oh. I will read you this. Richard saying that I do want you to hear this. He's talking about the prefaces to Harley Granville Barker's prefaces to Shakespeare. With a few exceptions, Auden on Othello, Barbara Everett on Hamlet, Jan Cott on The Tempest, it's the only critical work about Shakespeare that's made any impact on me. And part that is from my father, whose view of Shakespeare was brief and brutal. It's absolute balls.
Well, you know, I was thinking walking around Paris this morning. I never went to the theatre. The first time I saw a proper play was when I was 16. I grew up in the country, and we just never went to the theatre. My parents never went to the theatre. So I went to see a play which I hadn't read. I had heard of, but I hadn't read. And it was the first play I saw, and it was called Hamlet. And the actor playing Hamlet was called Peter O'Toole. And I thought, and then years and years later, I read of Berlioz going to the theatre at the age of 22. This is about 27. And Berlioz, who at that time didn't speak a single word of English, saw a production of Hamlet and was completely capsized by it. He said he'd been reborn and learned to, struck by thunder, and he fell in love with Shakespeare, he fell in love with Hamlet, and he fell in love with Harriet Smithson, who was playing Ophelia, who he eventually married, had a very unhappy marriage. And I was like Berlioz. I was completely capsized by Shakespeare. And I should, a bit of explanation is, I was 16 and you'd think, how come you hadn't, because I was specializing in science subjects. And so I was very unread, illiterate. And then I started to, I had the infection. I became fascinated by Shakespeare. And then I was lucky that at the age of 18, then a couple of years later, I went to the Royal Shakespeare Company, which had just started, and saw The Wars of the Roses. And then I saw Peter Brook's production of King Lear, which it really did change my life in the sense that I thought, I didn't realize you could do this sort of thing in the theatre. And it sort of made me want to be a director. And that production and The Wars of the Roses really were the pivotal moments for many, many, many of my generation who worked in the theatre.
Since you mentioned your own childhood, I'll go back in time to Richard III, which suggested the England of Oswald Mosley in the 30s, but also timeless, perhaps Romanian dictators. And of course, I remember Ian McKellen's performance. I also remember a picture on screen of a very peaceful, charming English village, which I think you said was your own. So that was a pretty personal political statement, wasn't it?
there's Winston Churchill used to refer to the sunlit uplands of Britain, and I was trying to. There's a speech of Henry in the speech where he invokes what it is that they're fighting for against Richard, and maybe the phrase "sunlit uplands" actually comes from there, but that was the world I was visualizing. It's interesting you say Romania, because it was partly inspired, the production, by the fact I had spent quite a lot of time here during the Ceausescu years, several visits during the worst period of the Romanian tyranny in the 70s. I had a great friend called Ion Karamitru, who was is a great Romanian actor who played Hamlet there. And so I knew it firsthand or secondhand, vicariously, what it was like to live under a tyranny. And we took the production to Bucharest, and it's one of the most moving moments of my life. Is the beginning of the theatre, which held about 1,500 people. There must have been 2,000 people. They were just sitting and standing and hanging from balconies, and then at the beginning of the production, there was you just see Richard in an army greatcoat, and he looked like Stalin. And you could hit the whole audience gasped. I mean, huge. And then they started to applaud. And then everything, they saw the whole story of Richard III as the allegory of Ceausescu. And then at the end, I've just never seen anything like it in the theatre. They just went insane. And then I had to go on and speak. And I had an interpreter by me, and she started, and they all chanted English, 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 and it was just it was heart-stopping. It came to its home.
To come back to more technical considerations, if I may. Do you brief your actors differently for theatre or a film about verse speaking, about speaking the verse?
I suppose the thing is with these actors, we rehearsed, unusually for a film, we rehearsed for 2 weeks. Very concentrated rehearsals. These are, almost every one of these actors is hugely experienced at verse speaking. In the theatre, you would have, you wouldn't be able to get that cast in the theatre. So, I assembled this cast of, from heaven. So in the theatre, you would have much more disparity of experience, and you would be saying occasionally, look, you must look at the line endings, you must, or sometimes you'd say, I know what you're trying to make that line mean, but it just doesn't scan like that. You can't do the emphasis like that. So in that sense, you reverse speaking and make it, if they're good actors, they will have a musicality. So if they're bad actors, there's no way you're ever going to teach them. It's like, if they can't hear it, they're never going to get it. So there's no point with bad actors saying, look, it goes, this is an iambic pentameter, the line endings and the rhythm is like this, or there's a dangling half line, and there's a pause there, and all those things that you become second nature. Reading Shakespeare is like reading a score. And, you know, very, very valuable. Good actors just suck it up. The bad ones just, you know.
Could I ask you, is it out of bounds to wonder how you solve the problem of what Dr. Johnson called the exclusion of Gloucester's eyes?
How I solve the problem? Well, you have to see the film, but
I haven't seen it.
no, but it's unbearable, but it's not. I don't gloat on the violence, and it's quite subjectively shot. I mean, it's, as it were, the screen at one point goes black when the second eye is big. But I was absolutely insistent that it's got to be more by suggestion. I mean, you see it, the start of it, but you don't see, you know, the temptation in a film would be rolling eyeballs and there isn't that, but it is horrible. It's suitably horrible. And what I think makes it so effective is that Regan and Cornwall. Regan and Cornwall take a sort of almost erotic delight in it. They're kind of on some awful kind of sadistic, erotic trip. And so that's very much, you're very conscious of their sort of lubricious enjoyment of the brutality. So it's not just, you know, the savagery, but it, you know, it's a good question, because it can be just awful, and you think, well, I know the eyes aren't being put out, and I'm not convinced, but so it's always a question of suggestion of what you decide, more what you decide not to show than what you decide to show.
I was incredibly lucky, and I could see the film already. So I have a question about cutting. Well, I agree that this is a deeply moving and very powerful film. Really, all the cuts, the immense cuts. There's only one other thing that raised questions in me: Edgar's figure. His monologue is cut to 2 lines. Edgar, I nothing, yeah. And I kind of felt that it somehow, you know, diminishes his figure. Otherwise, I love the film.
Well, thank you. It's true that, I mean, and actually I agree with you, but the remit for the film was that it had to be 1 hour, 50 minutes. It had to be 110 minutes. Actually, it works out, it's 116 minutes, but Amazon and the BBC said, and at a certain point I said, it simply is not possible. And we had a screening where I said, look, I cannot cut any more from this film. And at the stage of getting there, I had cut quite substantially Edgar's monologue. But the price of making the film was to make a film of King Lear within that time frame. So it is a victim of, and there are other places where I regret that I had to cut. There are 3 or 4 lines in the mad scene in the shopping centre, lines I wanted there, some lines I wanted in the jungle. So yeah, it's a good point.
There's another question, Sarah?
In your 1997 theatre production, you staged the Dover cliff scene on almost a bare stage with a little mist, creating a very ambiguous environment. So we really didn't know if the cliff was there or not. And on film, you show us the cliff. So I would love to have your thoughts on how to direct the Dover Cliff scene on screen.
Well,
so it's so metaphorical.
I shot it in a way that I would have the choice in editing of saying to the audience at the beginning, here is the cliff and he's going to fall over it, and he's going to jump, or not showing the cliff. I decided to show the cliff. I decided that I would assume that the audience didn't know what was going to happen and that he was going to commit suicide. And so up to the point where he jumps, it is edited in a way that you think he's going to commit suicide, and you see Edgar actually in tears, you know, his father is going to jump, and then it's revealed that he hasn't, and that then you realize that Edgar has contrived the whole thing. Obviously, you can't do that in the theatre. So in the theatre, it's a sort of Beckettian thing. I just want that the whole thing is a kind of poetic device, poetic conceit. But I mean, Peter is right about, you know, theatre, the film is sort of relentlessly literal. You know, a street is a street is a street, and a cliff is a cliff. And you can only sort of not make it literal by sort of holding off showing it, but eventually you kind of have to show your hand. But it's, I mean, it was really interesting. I tend now to behave with film editors in the same way as I do with actors, of not saying, I want this to be cut in this way. And so I always say to the script supervisor, don't say to the editor that this is the order that I had imagined. Because I love seeing, coming in and see, oh, I see, you're telling the story that I had never imagined. You could start with that shot and that. And you would never get that experience if you said to the editor, you've got to start.
Thank you. Peter, you wanted to say a few lines to conclude the session?
No, thank you. Only again, just to reiterate, both to the French Shakespeare Society and in particularly to Sir Richard, my heartfelt thanks for coming here. I think this is an extraordinary film. I think that the audience we've whetted their appetite suitably, I hope, and you've got a real treat in store. So thank you. In conclusion, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard and Peter.
Thank you. Thank you. Here we go.
And we're now having a break. 30 minutes. A 30-minute break.